Hi, my name is Ayub, and today I am honored to welcome Anja Franczak, founder of the Institute of the Good Death, an initiative challenging societal taboos around dying, death, and grief. Anja is a certified grief counselor, end-of-life doula, and ritual celebrant, working to create compassionate, personalized approaches to navigating loss. Through her interdisciplinary work, she helps individuals and organizations embrace open, honest conversations about mortality, inspiring a culture shift towards acceptance and understanding. So let's explore her profound mission and the global death positive movement. Welcome to the Business Blueprint. Anja, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. Really excited to have you. But first, I want to start by asking you, what do you do?
What do I do? That's a good question. I'm never able to answer it with one word or one sentence because what I'm doing, it has kind of grown and become quite diverse over the past years. So basically, I work with people in different situations when death appears in their life. I'm a death doula, so people who have a person in their family who is very sick or very, very old, they contact me to work with the family to prepare them for what's coming. Okay. I'm also a ritual celebrant, so I design and conduct funeral ceremonies. Okay. And I'm a grief counselor, so I work with people who have suffered from, who have lost somebody. And I'm the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization called the Institute of the Good Death, which is an initiative that has an educational goal. We want to raise awareness and literacy around grief and death in Poland. So we want to help support society to find a healthier relationship with our mortality.
Got it. How did you start this and what inspired you to start this?
What inspired me? Well, at my personal story level, there is a personal loss at the beginning of it. I lost different people who were close to me. And in these situations, I experienced that there is pain connected through the loss itself, but actually there's a lot of pain that comes from how people react to it. Like people, when they hear that somebody has died, most people go like, what do I say now? How do I behave? What should I do? And that feeling of insecurity and of helplessness often has the effect that people go away. So I experienced that some people were ignoring me, some people stopped contacting me. So in a time of like crisis, I witnessed and experienced that people have no, tools to handle it. And that's when I started to realize that actually, well, death itself it's just there. It's neither good or bad. It is a part of life. However, how we deal with it, that is a cultural level, and we have a problem here. Like we live in a culture that has lost the ability to support each other in the face of death. And that was like the starting point of my thinking journey. And then at some point I met people who work in this area, mostly outside of Poland. I met a grief counselor in Germany. I met a death doula in England. I met a ritual celebrant in the Netherlands. And meeting these people was just mind-blowing for me. I had no idea that such professions exist. And all these people were like really nice and very grounded and very calm and very joyful, working with death and having a lot of fun in life. So they were very inspirational to me. And I thought, wow, I just want to learn. And then I started to learn in this field, and slowly, this all developed to where we are now.
So what does the learning process look like? How do you become a doula?
Yeah, there are different courses and trainings and academies. I went to a year-long training for grief counseling in Germany. And then I went to a death doula training and to a ritual celebrant training. And there are certain elements that are present in all of these fields. So things like being present with another person active listening, being able to hold space for somebody. Then there is some grief psychology that is necessary as a fundamental knowledge. There is some knowledge about anthropology and about rituals, like what do we humans do when there are times of transition in our life. We basically do rituals that support us. And some basic knowledge about the dying process, like what happens to our bodies when we die. So at some point, people started asking me to share this knowledge. And basically today I'm an educator mostly. Like the biggest part of my work is sharing knowledge and experience so that this this knowledge that actually belongs to us, to the people, but for some reason kind of got lost culturally, that this can come back to society and to our culture.
Got it. So most people, when you think about death, you think about it as something negative, and obviously you miss certain people that you value a lot in your life, but it is part of our life. Everyone at some point is going to die. And so how do you make that learning process very smooth so that people don't affect their life in a way that's going to ruin their lives, for example, without I mean, how do you teach them in a way that's going to be smooth to not ruin their life, knowing that the person they lost is in a better place, maybe, or how do you think about that?
Well, I think it not necessarily has to ruin our lives, the topic, but it's never smooth. Yeah. So it is a tough experience to lose a loved person. And we live in a culture that currently tells us not to look at that at all. So when people are grieving, they often hear advice such as, you'll get over it, or look at the positive side, or cheer up. So we tend to encourage people to look away or to not feel pain. So basically, at the center of grief work and education is finding the courage and the trust that taking care of pain is possible in other ways than ignoring it. So going into this experience and finding a personal way, what stabilizes me in this. I'll give you some examples from working with families where somebody is close to death. Often people within that time, within those last months or weeks or days, they are sometimes really focused just on medical aspects, like how many calories does a person get, what kind of medicine, what's the dosage, and are very focused on like technical stuff connected to the body. And this sometimes is like an escape mechanism not to deal with emotions. And sometimes people miss this opportunity to be really close with each other at the end of the life and to make a kind of summing up, or to make also a conscious process of thanking each other, of evaluating kind of what this life was about. What are the traces that one leaves behind or wants to leave behind? Maybe if there are some conflicts that are still there that need to be resolved. So sometimes I'm a kind of a mediator between family members to help them talk to each other and to express needs. And also what we are doing more and more now in our institute, in our NGO, is education of medical staff. Because it turns out that doctors, nurses, and other professions that you find in hospitals, nursing homes, and so on, actually in their educational path, there is almost nothing about dying and death. That like they learn how to work with a living person, but there is hardly any knowledge about the dying process itself, because it's treated as an enemy. We should do everything to prevent it. So there is little tools how to just accompany somebody through that process, and there's hardly any training on soft skills, like how to go into an empathetic conversation with a patient and with the family, how to tell somebody bad news, how to tell somebody that he or she is going to die or that somebody just died. So we try to fill our organization, we try to fill this gap in education.
Got it. So how do you navigate that process if someone, let's say, is still wants to fight death, let's say, like they think, oh no, I still want to cure this disease I have, or like whatever problem I have, I think I still have a chance and I'm gonna fight that. So how do you balance that and just getting the person to understand, hey, like maybe it's also better to consider this option as well, that it might happen, and you should get them through that process of
that's a very delicate matter. I think we don't really have the right to push this conversation to anybody. So there's a need to make clear communication of facts. But if somebody wants to stay in this attitude of fighting until the end of his or her life, they have the right to do that. So the job of the doctors or the death doula or whoever is never to take away hope. But the job is to say, okay, of course, we will do everything to cure and everything to fight, if we want to use that war metaphor, which actually I don't like. We can do that. And we want you to know that if you want to talk with us about the other way that things might go, we are open to talk about that. So that's one thing, to show openness for that subject, and that we are not afraid of talking about that, but that we are stable and grounded enough to talk about difficult stuff as well. But actually the situation you described, that a patient is saying, oh, I don't want to talk about this, it happens. But what happens much, much more often is that the person who is sick knows that they're dying and they want to talk about it. And they say things like, I know I have the feeling that I don't have much time left. And what usually happens is that the rest of the family says like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Like they kind of put an immediate stop to that topic, because not everybody, but most people are so afraid of these conversations. Maybe they think if we speak about death, somebody will die immediately. But surprise, it's not like that. I mean, if we talk about sex, nobody can get pregnant from that. Same if we talk about death, it doesn't mean that somebody's going to die immediately. There's no connection in between that. So more often I have the situation that a patient wants to talk about how and where he or she wants to spend the last days of her life, how they want to be buried or cremated, what the funeral should look like. And there is this need to talk about this because it gives a little bit the feeling of getting back control, or it gives the feeling that, okay, I cannot change that I'm going to die, but I can make some decisions. I'm still a person who can make decisions, but nobody wants to talk. So there's this thought that, okay, if we just ignore the subject, it will go away, but it won't go away. Actually, when the family members or the doctors even block these conversations, it causes additional pain, because then the patient will do that conversation in his or her head and will be really lonely with that. So there's a lot of loneliness around dying and grief. And what my dream, I'm really dreaming about a world, a culture in which we humans are able to be close to each other and to talk with each other and to support each other also when death comes, and not try to run away from it.
And where did that come from? Was it always like this, that humans are afraid of death and not want to talk about it? Or is it something new?
I think it's very different in different parts of the world. in different cultures. And also, I think it used to be different in different moments of history, in different eras. For sure, a historian could give like a deeper insight into this, but I would say that over the course of the last 100, maybe 200 years, a lot has changed due to different processes in society, such as that hospitals appeared, and that the idea came up that a person who is dying should be at an institution and not at home. The same process that is around birth. At some point, we had the idea, giving birth is not a family issue. It should take place at an institution. And then in the 70s, and there was this kind of public society movement to reclaim the process of giving birth. And it's slowly coming back to families, and the atmosphere changes around it. And something similar we can observe now around death, that this idea of delegating the dying process to the hospital, it probably was not the best idea. No. So now we have this movement of death doulas, of death educators and grief educators, and not only hospitals, but also funeral homes. The way that contemporary funeral industry works very much kind of deepens this distance towards death, because a main kind of part of the communication of that industry is often, this is a very difficult subject, we will do it for you. So it's actually a service that disempowers people. Of course, it's great that there are professionals in that area who can support people in that times of preparing a funeral. But I think we need kind of a revolution within that industry, that it's not about taking away something difficult from people, but supporting people in a very challenging process, but empowering them, like helping them to discover that, wow, we can do this. We have the strength and the resources to go through this.
Got it. And what is the Polish culture when it comes to death, and how is it different from other countries?
In Poland, there's a very specific situation, because in Poland, the traditional ways to, for example, deal with a dead family member, they changed quite late, like until the 90s, basically. It was still pretty common in rural areas, especially, that a person who had died stayed at home for another day or even 3 days. And there were a lot of rituals around that. In Polish, it's called czuwanie. So like a wake, like a vigil, like sitting vigil with a dead body. So being in a situation where a dead person and a community of living are together in the same room. And together they sing, pray, eat, drink. So there's a whole traditional culture around that. And for example, I'm half German, so I mostly know the German industry, let's say. Those practices, they disappeared already in the 50s. So there's hardly any living memory of it. But in Poland, many people remember these situations. And there was a lot of wisdom actually in these traditions, because they created a community space to carry something difficult together. There was space to be together, to express emotions, to understand actually what happened. Like when you see the dead person, it's of course a very difficult experience, but on a psychological level, it's helpful in the grieving process, because it makes you realize that this is reality. And if you don't see your dead grandmother, you just get a phone call that she has died, and then 3 days later you see like an urn that size. Our brain just doesn't get it. It's too abstract. So to get back to your question, there's a lot of kind of tradition that has almost been lost, but is still within reach. And there's currently more and more people who are aware of that, the fact that something valuable is about to be lost, and they want to reconnect to these traditions. They want to revive the tradition of taking care of the dead and not sending them off to companies.
Got it. So I want to understand like the most challenging part of your job, because I can imagine like dealing with people in very vulnerable positions, whether the family or the person himself or herself. So what is the most challenging part of your job?
There's a lot of challenging parts. I think some of them are connected to any kind of pioneer work. When you want to do something new, there is like millions of challenges. There's people who immediately feel that, wow, this is interesting. And there's people who are like, what? I mean, there are like, for example, the funeral industry, like the mainstream funeral companies in Poland, they have very different reactions to our work. Some are very interested and very open, and more people from these companies, they come to our trainings and our workshops to get these soft skills and to find another way of entering dialogue with their customers. But some are like, what? This is unnecessary, or they don't want to work with us. But I think in every industry you find open-minded people, curious people who are eager to develop and to learn, and you will find people who are who have a closed mindset. So that's actually not that specific to that industry, but to any industry. What's of course very delicate about this whole subject of working with people in crisis, people who are in pain. It's the question how to have very clear ethical borders. So in an ideal world, for example, grief counseling and the work of a death doula would be part of the medical system, of the health system. So it would be part of what people are entitled to use when they need it. And we don't have that situation right now.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because this what we are doing, it's really new. Yeah. I mean, we're now starting to have great partnerships, for example, with the medical chamber. Okay. So we're having partnerships with hospitals. However, to really get this onto the level of the Ministry of Health and have this as like a state-funded program, that's our aspiration for the future. But that's a lot of work because it's systemic change. Yeah. It's not something that we can just decide, but there's a lot. There will be a need for a lot of people to execute leadership in this to really lead to systemic change on the long term.
Are there any countries who are more advanced in that level where they already have that integrated in their health system?
Yeah, I think like really integrated in the health system, it's very rare. However, I just came back from the European Grief Conference, which is a biannual event that takes place in a different city. Like 2 weeks ago, it was in Dublin, in Ireland. I was there with my colleague. There was one other person from Poland. That's it. Like from Poland, there were no other participants, and it's a conference with around 400 participants. And there were people from different European countries presenting like the how it works in their country, what kind of public initiatives there are, what kind of social initiatives, what kind of research programs are going on at universities. And that was just really fascinating and inspiring. And also a bit, every time I'm at this conference, it shows me that there's a long path ahead of us. Like I can give you one example. In Poland, there is literally a few NGOs that offer grief support. Okay. And in at that conference 2 years ago, I listened to a panel discussion where they tried to figure out how to improve the system in the UK. And the problem they were discussing was that there was too little exchange and connection between NGOs in the UK dealing with grief. And it turned out that there are 882 NGOs, like local initiatives, doing this type of work in the UK. And
they didn't know about it.
And I thought, wow, that's your problem, that there is too little communication between them. I mean, I get it, but that's a problem 2.0. So we are like at the moment where there are like some initiatives, but there could be much, much more. So I hope that in the next years there will be similar initiatives. Will show.
So how do you raise awareness about that?
Yeah, we do that in different ways. We mostly organize different educational formats. So workshops, training courses, conferences, and they are partly about dying, about palliative care, about how to take care of somebody at the end of the life. Some of them are around funeral ceremonies, and some are around the topic of grief. And we announce them on our website, and we communicate them through our different channels. We often partner with different institutions. And that's kind of interesting because our partners are very different. Some are from the medical sector, like the medical chamber or different hospitals, but some are from the world of culture. So museums, theaters, galleries. And this is how we get to people who otherwise would never hear about what we're doing. So for example, we have one workshop format, which is a one-day workshop about the dying process and how to recognize when somebody's dying, how to read the signs of the body and of the behavior, how to react in a supportive way, and so on. And this type of workshop in Germany, where I was trained, these workshops take place at hospices, and they are booked out like very, very quickly. But here in Poland, if we did that in a hospice area, we would really have difficulties right now to get participants because people are very afraid still of that topic. So instead of doing that at a hospice, we do it at a theater or at a museum. So in a space that people associate with something nice, with a space where there are nice people and so on. So it's a kind of a guerrilla strategy we have. And looking at like our target group, looking at the people who come to our workshops, for example, I can see that's 3 different type of people. So one are medical professionals. Doctors and nurses who say that the way that currently dying is treated at the hospitals, it's bad. We need to improve this. So they are looking to learn for their professional way. The second group are private individuals who are right now in a situation where this subject is present because their grandmother is very old or their mom is very sick, and they know that right now we need this educational information to help ourselves. And the third group, and actually that's a very interesting group to work with, those are people in their 30s, 40s, who slowly start to realize, my parents are aging. They're going to die someday. So it's not like right now I need help, but it's kind of a consciousness of, wow, this will happen. We cannot avoid it. So it could be good to be prepared. So they come to educate themselves and to equip themselves with knowledge for some point in the future.
And who's the most difficult group to work with? Is it the people who are affected, who are going to die soon? Or is it the family members and relatives whose family is, or whose family member is about to die? Like parents?
Well, I think emotionally the most challenging, it's people who know, people in grief. And the people in grief, grief does not start at the moment of death, but it starts much earlier. So people who know that that somebody's dying and they they are on this path of acceptance, which is super challenging. I mean, it's the most difficult thing to say to a person you love, thank you for everything we had together. I love you, and you can go. To give somebody the allowance, the permission to die. But that's actually what's needed. That's the biggest sign of love we can give in that situation. Yeah. So that is emotionally challenging, but like technically or pedagogically challenging, it is always when an institution invites us, and like from the upper level, there was the decision that a group of employees should participate in the training. Okay. So whenever we organize trainings on our own, we just open, we make an announcement, people sign up, then people want to be there. Okay. But sometimes when I'm invited to, I don't know, a hospital, for example, and then the atmosphere is different because somebody was told by their boss that they have to attend. So then usually the atmosphere at the beginning is like people are more like, oh, having this attitude of, okay, what's she gonna tell us? Yeah, this young girl, what's she gonna teach us about death? Yeah, so methodically, those formats, they need more work of building trust, of making a connection, a relation, to invite people to relax and to open themselves. So that takes a bit more time sometimes in these formats, but so far I've made rather only positive experiences. Like the feedback that we get on our trainings, it's incredible. So that's actually how we want to develop our organization in the future, that we want to go in the direction of like really becoming a small academy, a small, like basically a school where we train people in these skills that death doulas and grief educators have.
So what are the skills required or needed to be a great death doula?
A great death doula. Well, as I said at the beginning, I think it's a combination of different skills. Like one is that you have to work a lot with yourself and with your own history of loss and with your own attitude towards dying and death. That's a lot of inner work you have to do in order to get your own, to find your own kind of grounded position in that. Because only when you are calm inside, you can stabilize other people. So there's the same as every therapist has to go through therapy also, besides the training. That's a very important part of the work. Then there is like this whole skill set of conversation and of connecting with people, of true listening, of deep listening, of also finding out what's behind words, of communicating in a subtle way. And then there's some like medical knowledge, like very basic medical knowledge. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but basic signs of dying, to know about them. Some mediation skills to facilitate dialogue and conversation between people. That's quite a lot, actually, if you take this all together.
Got it.
One thing, knowledge about rituals. Okay. Like what rituals actually are, how they function, why we do them, and a basic skill to create rituals together with a family. And using the word rituals, I'm not talking about some super complicated ceremonies or about some, I don't know, magic stuff. A ritual can be that I would ask you to go to your dying father and say 3 things that you are thankful for, or to describe 5 situations you will never remember. So if this is done in a conscious and structured way, these are rituals for me. Huh?
I've always had this question that what's more difficult? Is it dying or being alongside a relative who's dying? And I always thought like I would never want to see my parents die, you know, and because I will be, you know, completely heartbroken, destroyed, you know, emotionally. And so I think also like if I go first, that would be very hard on them as well. So which is more difficult, you know? And I cannot really just think about what is the solution, or like what's not necessarily solution, but what's the hardest part.
Yeah, it's going to be one way or the other,
exactly.
right?
Like one of them has to happen.
Yeah, in every relationship, with friends, with family, with lovers, whenever we enter a relationship, we kind of make a contract that there will be grief at some point. That's an invisible contract, but it's there. So whenever we agree to love, we agree to grief. Because either you will die first and I will be grieving, or I will die first and you will be grieving. It's very unlikely that we will die at exactly the same moment. I mean,
unless you plan it.
Well, let's not go there. But there is, like for people who have not experienced this yet, it maybe sounds completely overwhelming and terrible and like the worst thing that can happen to you. And maybe it is the worst thing that can happen to you, or that will happen to you. But there are ways to make this experience not only terrible, but to surround it with love. Okay. So there's this misconception that when something is sad or difficult, then there is this idea it shouldn't be there. Yeah? But that's impossible. So the idea is rather, okay, there is something sad and difficult. How can we embrace it? How can we bring tenderness into it? How can we bring basically love and warmth into a very difficult and sad situation? Because in the end, that's all we can do.
If you're finding value in this episode, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you do not miss out on incredible conversations with great entrepreneurs to learn more about business.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, even in life, many people consider sadness as something that they shouldn't have. And your goal in life is to be 100% of the time happy and excited, and all these other emotions are bad.
Good luck with that.
Exactly. And this is why I believe depression is getting more and more popular, because people see others in social media, for example, and they post only the positive things and the happiest moments. And once they have a bad moment, like a sad moment in their life or something, they're going through some hard time, they think, oh, my life is bad and that it shouldn't be like this. I should be happy. But life is about both. It's about being happy and navigating also sadness and difficult moments in life, as death as well. And I believe there is so much to be learned, and people should learn how to navigate also these moments, especially death. And I would love to know, like, what are other initiatives to kind of spread that message around not only Poland but also the world.
Oh, in different countries there is a lot going on. Like in the United States, for example, there is an initiative that kind of also was one of the different inspirations for us to organize, to found our institute. There's something called the Order of the Good Death, which also is a collective, and they do a lot of like educational work to raise public awareness. Actually, don't know what they're doing currently. In Germany, there is a lot going on. There's more and more death doulas, grief counselors. They even have their professional associations already, because they make it's not a union, but there's so many people who do this kind of job that they organize themselves. The ways that funeral change, we can observe that in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Ireland. I have this impression that it's a kind of collective thing that's currently happening in many different places in Europe. And for example, our organization, so when we look at our structure, we're a very small organization. We have a board of 3 women right now. So it's Maria, Agatha, and me. However, we have a kind of satellite structure of friends and partners and experts. We call it the collective of the good death. So these are not permanently employed staff members. They're actually not employed at all, but it's a network of people whom we collaborate with on certain projects. So let's say a conference organizer writes to us or calls us and says, I would love to make a panel about death with like different perspectives. And then I'm like, yeah, sure. We have 100 people in this collective, and they all deal with the subject of death in their professional or artistic work, but they're very, very different. So in this collective, there are people who are from hospices and hospitals and nursing homes, but there are also people who work in funeral homes, and there are people who work at different universities and who do research on death in the field of history, sociology, philosophy. There are also some journalists, artists, like it's a whole bunch of very different people. But what connects us all is that we want to change the culture of death that's currently mostly about avoiding death.
Got it. And what about younger people? Do you have any programs for younger people in schools, for example, or universities? Because a lot of also young people lose family members and they don't know how to deal with that. Or worse, it can ruin their future because they choose certain ways to deal with it that is not good for them. And do you have any programs in
That's a very good idea, actually, what we could also do in the future. We do that a little bit. Okay. So we have a collaboration where that parts of our team, we go and teach medicine students at the university. And there are also people in our collective who work with young people and children. So they sometimes are invited by a school, for example. But that's not our focus right now. So we mostly work with adults. Okay. But let's see what the future will bring.
Okay. Can you discuss any innovative grief methods that you've developed or that you believe is most effective?
Oh, that's interesting. A grief method. I've never thought of this, connecting these two words. Basically, grief is not. It's not a method. Okay. It's a very deep human experience, and actually, what it needs is allowance to be there. Like people in grief need the allowance to be grieving and to be sad, but mostly they hear stuff like, get yourself together, you have to be strong, don't cry. So our education is mostly about normalizing grief, about allowing each other to experience it. And also it's about education, how grief looks like, because it's very different for different people. It's a very individual process. Like my grief can be, or for sure is completely different than yours. No. But also my grief after my dog is different than my grief after the death of my grandma. So we all go through different experiences. And in the 20th century, there was a very dominant thinking in the psychology of grief about the so-called stages of grief. That there's a certain structure and then you go or should go through different stages. And contemporary grief theory very much says it's just not true. That was an idea, that was a theory, but there is no such thing as stages of grief. So the more contemporary models, they often emphasize on, for example, the fact that grief is a lot of motion in us. So there are moments where we are totally in utter despair and pain, and then there are moments when we have this warm feeling of beautiful memories, and then we go back into crying, and then we have had enough and we just go out to a party to not think about this. So all the contemporary grief theories, they describe a process of so-called oscillation. Like grief is a very alive process. So grief is not death. It's very lively. And a key aspect in contemporary grief theory is the concept of so-called continuing bonds. Mm-hmm. So grief is not grief is not about forgetting somebody. Yeah. It's not about letting go of the past and moving on, but it's always about the idea, how can I still feel that this person is a part of my life, that not only, for example, my father or my mother or my grandmother was important and now they are dead, but no, they were important and they are still important.
So how do you continue that bond?
Mm-hmm. So that continuing bond, people do it in different ways. People do it by remembering their dead loved ones, by talking about them with other family members, by sharing memories, but also by symbolic actions, by like small rituals. Mm-hmm. For example, let's say that my grandmother, she taught me how to cook. So whenever I make the pasta recipe that I got from her, it's a way to feel that inner bond. It's a way to still feel connected with her.
So how do you make sure that connection is not going to make you sad? Mm-hmm. You know, because if you think of certain memories, it might trigger you to feel sad at that specific moment because you remember that person is dead and that you're gonna, start crying. Mm-hmm. So how do you avoid that and take it more in a positive way?
Yeah, that's not possible. We cannot avoid it. So it's not about avoiding sadness, but it's about learning how to go through sadness. Okay. Because when somebody starts crying, that person will also stop crying. So it's emotions, they come, they have a peak, and then they calm down. And it's not about not being sad, because it is just very sad. So this whole continuing bonds concept is about the idea that there is a side of loss and pain, and there is a side of connection and love and warmth. And it's not about avoiding this part, but strengthening this part. So in most of the long-term grieving processes, the pain will change. It will become softer. It will become it will have a different frequency. Maybe we will cry not every day, but every second day, and then once a week. And so it will change in frequency and intensity. But the love does not have to become less. So we have the right to stay connected and have an emotional bond with our loved ones forever. So it's about strengthening this, because what people hear most in contemporary culture is that you should not deal with this grief thing too long. You should get over it. You should let go. But the idea of letting go, it sounds painful to many people in grief. It sounds like a threat. It sounds like the idea or the risk of losing the person again. Like, what? You died and I lost you, and now I should let you go and I will lose you even more. So this continuing bonds concept is about not letting go, but staying in touch.
Got it. So what is that balance of going through the grief and also being like living your life, without letting that impact you?
It will impact you.
Impact your life in a way. Let's say, you're working, you have a business to run, and you cannot afford to spend so much time grieving. And I believe every person is different in how they grieve. And so what is I don't want to say an optimal way, because it's probably hard to find that, but what is the best way to kind of balance that, moving on and taking care of a business, for example, and at the same time grieving if it's a tough one for you?
Yeah, that is a very tough question, actually, because it goes deep into our concept of what we are as humans. Because in the system we live in, there is this big pressure or expectation that we have to function, that we have to be productive, that we have to work. And grief is against all that. Like, grief makes you very slow. It makes you very vulnerable. And that's the big question, how we can create a system together that that really supports people in grief. So if the idea is to make somebody super efficient again, is that helpful, and is that even possible, or will that on the long term have like really terrible consequences? So what I would like to say is that the idea that many people still have about grief is that, okay, somebody died, and then you have grief for some time, and then you should get out of grief, and then you should be normal again. And I mean, now I said that in a very ironic way, because it doesn't work like that. It's not that like you can take a rubber and kind of erase the grief out of your life. But if you have this topic of grief, which is kind of taking a lot of space, and it probably will always have an importance, instead of trying to get rid of that, there is the idea of that life will grow around this. So time will pass. We will make new experiences. We maybe come back to work. We meet new people. We travel. So there is this subject of grief in my life, but around it, my life grows. So in a life that's full, like a fulfilled life, it's not about being happy all the time, because that's not possible. But like a fulfilled life means that in this life, there is space for everything. There is space for this grief experience. And around the grief experience, there is space for work and fun and family and travel and whatever you want. So that's what the process is about, to grow and develop as a person, so that we are able to hold this grieving part of us, which will be with us forever, but that this will not completely determine our identity and our way of living, but to grow in such a way that, okay, grief is part of our life, but let's also make space for all the beauty.
Is there an experience that you had with a client that you cannot forget, that it was very unique, it was something about it was special, or the person had a very unique experience that you couldn't forget, that how to say it, whether it's negative or positive, you know what I mean? If a client had a specific or unique experience, either they didn't accept the fact that they're dying, or their relative is dying.
Yeah.
How did you go through that, and what was special about that experience?
Yeah, there's a certain type of feedback that always touches me very deeply. It's after meeting people who are taking care of a dear person who is old or dying or sick or all of it together. And these people come, for example, to our workshops and they are super scared. They have no idea what it's going to look like. Where do you want to get this knowledge? Like, who is going to tell you what dying looks like? Yeah, we're going to tell you. I mean, we don't know all the details because nobody knows, but this is knowledge that you will not get directly from doctors unless it's a fantastic palliative care expert. That should actually that's one of the key qualifications of palliative care doctors, that they educate you about what's going on and what's ahead of you. So let's say we have this workshop where there is, I remember like one specific, for example, a young girl she was taking care of her grandfather. And it was clear that the grandfather would die very soon. And she was just scared if she would be able to be with him, or how she should recognize when she should call an ambulance. And nobody in the family really knew how to handle this. So she came to our workshop, which is it's a one-day workshop about death education. Okay. And during that workshop, she learned what are the typical symptoms that will appear. Like, how can I recognize, now it's getting closer, or okay, now we are really close. Now it could happen any moment. And also, what do I do after this person dies? Do I immediately have to call somebody and panic, or can I stay calm? So this girl was at the workshop, and then a few weeks later, she wrote an email to me and described, my grandfather has died. And thanks to this educational workshop, I was able to be with him. And when all those symptoms came, I recognized them. I was not in a position that I was freaking out and thinking, oh my God, what is going on? What does this mean? But I remembered, this is what I learned at the workshop. Okay, this is this. Now I can do this. This is this. Now I can do this. So thanks to knowledge, thanks to information, and this is the power of education, she was in a situation of a much lower level of fear. So still it was stressful and demanding, but she could calmly stay with her grandfather until the very end. And when I get feedback like this, I cry because then I think like, wow, okay, we have a real impact, and we bring a real change into people's lives.
100%. And what about nursing homes? Do you work with them as well? Because there are a lot of people who cannot take care of their parents or their grandparents, and they send them to nursing home. And I wonder whether they also deal with them there in that way that they can get them ready, or there is also a lack of education in that part as well. Yeah,
there also is a lack of education, and we also work in that field. Actually, this whole part of professional training for medical staff, that's something that we are now more developing. Like when I look at the way our organization started, there was no business idea or strategy or anything behind that. At the beginning, we were a bunch of people who were meeting regularly to discuss that there's a problem in our culture about death. And then at some point, we all chipped in 100 zlotys and we created a website together. So that's how it started. And then it grew into an NGO. And only since this year, we have a more strategic thinking, because so far we have mostly reacted to what the world threw at us. Like people asking us, oh, can you do a workshop here? Then we did a workshop at a theater festival. At that workshop, there was a nurse. She was like, wow, I really want to invite you to our hospital. At that hospital, there was the director of another hospital who invited us. So it has been very organic development so far. And now we are at a point where we see that there is a real need for this kind of education. So we are currently working on a portfolio of workshop formats, of training formats. So next year we will launch, like in 2025, we want to launch relaunch a part of our website with this these more precise offers that doctors and hospitals can reach out to. So that's something that we're currently working on.
Okay, so the main offers mainly are the workshops and the counseling. You do private counseling with people, right?
Well, actually, the private individual counseling, we don't do that with our organization. That's something that I do because I'm a trained counselor. But the organization itself, the main goal is education. Okay. It's not therapy or counseling, but it's basically giving people a fundament of knowledge and skills so they can take care of themselves. So that's like actually, that's also an interesting subject of what support should look like, or this whole subject of mental health. There is a kind of risk to create a new group of experts where people can delegate stuff to that actually they can do on their own, and they should do on their own, I believe. So the idea is not that we want to train, I don't know, many counselors or many death doulas so that people, when death comes, they're like, oh, okay, these are the experts. We will just throw the subject there. But our goal is to educate a broad group in society. We want this knowledge to come back deeply into culture. It's about empowerment. It's not about creating like an elite group of experts, but it's about a democratic empowerment of families and friends, of caring communities, that they will be able to take care of each other in times of trouble.
Interesting. Okay, back to the business side. If someone wants to start a business in that area, what would you advise them?
Well, if your main interest is money, that's not a good idea to go into this direction. Because you can make money a lot easier in other fields. Yeah? If somebody wants to open a business in that field, interesting.
Or how would you start your business?
I'm just thinking about what type of business we're talking about. Yeah, if we're talking about education, or if you're actually talking about funerals, because here is an interesting field that I see for the future in Poland. There's a trend in many countries all over the world that's about ecology and sustainability in the world of funerals, because a lot of products or practices are not environmental friendly. So cremation is not environmentally friendly. The way that dead bodies are treated, the way that caskets and coffins are constructed, the way that cemeteries are built, stone, metal, plastic, that's not sustainable. That we really have to change that on the long term. Or on the short term, actually. So what we can observe in many countries is a trend towards natural burial, to eco-friendly burial. So I recently went with my colleague Agatha. We did a field trip to Holland, and we visited a natural burial ground, which is basically a forest with some meadows. And there is no fence, and there are no monuments. There is no decoration. It's just a forest where people go hiking, they go running, biking, they walk their dogs. But this forest is officially a cemetery. And there are people buried there. And there are like tiny wooden signs that somebody's buried here. But it's nature, basically. And there are companies running these cemeteries. And I think this is the future. So this is something that I would that I would research and explore and invest in. What needs to happen first in Poland is that the law has to change, because right now there are legal barriers to create such a place.
Okay.
But for example, in Germany, the law was changed for this in 2001. And today there are more than 350 places like that. They're partly run publicly and partly by private companies. So this is, I think, a very interesting field to invest in. And also, to go even more into the future, alternative burial models, burial techniques such as aquamation. That's something that's legal already.
What's that?
Aquamation, that's a way to dissolve the body of a dead person, but not through fire, through water, through burning, but through water. It's a way of burial that is connected through a process where basically your body dissolves in water.
Okay, interesting.
And that's something that culturally may sound super weird for many people. It's actually fascinating, and it needs much less energy than cremation. So it's a more eco-friendly way. And also in the United States, there is this startup, or this, not startup anymore, it's a company called Recompose, and they do composting of human bodies, which also sounds gross if you hear it for the first time, but it's an amazing idea. It's basically to really give our bodies back to the earth instead of trying to make them last and to put them in the fancy coffins. So these are like
how does that conflict with religious beliefs? Because I believe different religions have different ways of burying bodies, and I think these solutions might conflict with few of them. So how to navigate that?
Yeah, that's actually how to navigate culture basically is the idea. I mean, how to, like any kind of leadership activities, always have to see what's actually the system that we are living and working in. This example of this composting technique, one other country where it's already functioning and working, it's Germany. And actually there they have made a partnership with the church. Okay. Because they did a lot of consultations if within the Catholic point of view this is okay or not, and they came to the conclusion that this is okay. Yeah. So basically they did a lot of preparation work, and they did a lot of strong partnerships before they, let's say, entered the market. I think there's years of preparation actually before this kind of systematic change can really be implemented.
Got it. You think AI will have some role in that process that people can use, like an AI doula, death doula?
Yeah, well, not only an AI death doula, but they can actually make an avatar or a bot of the dead person. Okay. There is a whole branch that's growing, which is called the digital afterlife industry. Oh. So these are startups, for example, which take all the data somebody has left on Facebook or wherever in the internet. Let's say my grandma has left a lot of data. Most of us leave so much data nowadays. And then this company would take all that data and create a bot. And then I could chat with my grandmother. So this is already existing. There are other companies that where you can create your own avatar. So you can train an avatar to be very similar to you, so that once you die, the avatar can take care of your children. Oh. So, it sounds like Black Mirror, but this is already happening. Do
you think this is a positive or
oh my God,
I'm
scared of that. Yeah. Me personally, I'm super scared of that. And my first reaction is like, oh my God, this shouldn't even be there. But of course, a reaction like this shouldn't be there. It's not helpful at all, because it is there. AI is a part of our reality, and it will take more and more space. So the question is actually not how to ignore it or be angry at it, but how to deal with it, how to create, I don't know, what kind of legal framework should be created, or what kind of education should be there for people before they use this, how make people aware of the advantages and the risks. Like that's a ton of questions that currently nobody has an answer to. And luckily there's great research being done. Last week I participated in a research project by the University of Cambridge, and they are exploring, actually, it's called Imaginaries of Immortality in the era of AI. So the research team, they are doing a lot of interviews and focus groups in different countries to find out what do people actually think about it, what are people's concerns and hopes and fears, and what do we as a society actually, how do we want to face this, and how do we also want to react to private companies bringing this to the market without maybe taking really into account the consequences it can have on the human psyche. Yeah. I don't know. In this field, I have actually no questions, but just millions of no answers, but millions of questions. Yeah.
And what do you think of anti-aging trend and people wanting to live longer or even being immortal?
Yeah.
And avoiding death?
Good luck with that. Well, I mean, the fear of death, it's probably our deepest fear as humans. It's underlying, it's subconsciously probably motivating a lot of our behavior. And the beauty industry, the anti-aging industry, it takes that and it plays with that and it just monetizes on that. It's basically false promises. I find that highly unethical. But I also, I understand it. Aging is difficult for most people, especially living in a culture that glorifies youth and beauty and health and success. Like nobody's life really looks like on Instagram. So I think we could really use more also media representation of what it means to live with an illness, what it means to be old, what it means to accompany somebody dying. These are experiences that we will all have in our life. So I think it's worth preparing each other and supporting each other in that.
Got it. How do you deal with your own emotional well-being, dealing with people on a day-to-day basis who are grieving and going through a hard time? Yeah,
it obviously is a demanding work, and like self-care is crucial. There are basic things like getting enough sleep and food and movement that apply to everybody. So I make sure of that, especially on the sleeping part. And then other methods to take care of ourselves. We have all different things that we like to stabilize us and that bring us joy. One task is to really consciously make space for joy and fun in life. So I make sure there's enough of that in my private life. I have a supervisor whom I reflect my work with. But I also have to say that this idea that people sometimes look at me with these big eyes and say, "Oh my God, what a job! Yeah, you're in touch with pain and death and grief." I don't perceive my job as a terrible job. I really, really deeply love my work. It's very fulfilling. It's very I have a lot of authentic relationships with people I work with my colleagues, but also with clients, with students. What I appreciate most about this work is that it's very democratic. It's a subject that matters to everybody. It's in the face of death, all those differences that divide society on a daily basis, they are not so relevant. So all these, we live in a time where people constantly fight. I mean, there is so much conflict, antagonism, there is so much division in the society, so much hate, so much aggression. And all this tends to soften when somebody is dying. So sometimes in these last days or weeks, what I have been witnessing in families, it was deeply moving that suddenly people who didn't talk to each other for years, they talk to each other. They hug each other. They say, I'm sorry. It's not always like that. I mean, I don't want to idealize this, but it happens very, very often that in the face of death, like we kind of remember what matters and we stop messing around. Yeah. And that's something that's utterly beautiful. And I have the privilege to witness that a lot. So very often after work, I come home and I actually smile.
Yeah, it's one of the tricks that I use myself as an entrepreneur. There are a lot of difficult things, you go through, and one way I go about that is to remind myself, hey, like, you're gonna die. And most of the things that I'm worried about or stressed about don't actually matter. And what matters is your family, the people you love, the mission you're on, and the rest is. And you just have to live with it. And so what is one last advice that you give to people who are grieving and who are going through something difficult or just lost someone they love?
What is the advice? Actually, I hardly ever give advice. Yeah, the biggest part of my job is to listen, to ask people what they actually need, what it feels like to be in their situation, that's the biggest part. So, what kind of advice I should give to a grieving person? I don't know. I think there's this idea that love and grief are two sides of the same experience. Like I said, whenever you enter a relationship, friendship, love relationship, whatever, you kind of sign a contract that you will be grieving sooner or later, because either you will break up or one of you will die. That's the way it is. So whenever there is grief, there is also love, because love, it can look differently. Sometimes love is anger and hate. Yeah, whenever you grieve, it means that something is important. And whenever that's something that we can be looking for in grief. So grief is not about forgetting, but it's about reconnecting with that love. And on the other hand, whenever you love, you know that there will be grief. So having this awareness of how fragile life is, it can really bring a higher appreciation. It can really change the way you describe that it can it gives focus on what really matters. So basically, talking about death and mortality, it's never really about death. I mean, we don't know anything about death. We don't know what death is. We don't know what is after death. So any conversation about death, in the end, is a conversation about life. It's about the question, not what life is after death, but what life we want before death. Yeah. How do we want to spend the time we have? Because it's limited. Yeah.
This is incredible. Anja, thank you so much for this. It was so insightful, so beautiful to hear that. And I hope and I believe many people will find that also useful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it was great.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Also, watch my masterclass on how to start a business in 5 steps in 2025. Thank you so much for your support.